Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome to I Care About You, the podcast where we dive deep into who we are, why we are, where we are, and how we can live more fulfilling lives. Now, today we have a super exciting episode. I'm so excited to get on with it. So, before we begin this incredible episode, I wanted to let you know there are a few trigger conversations that might happen during this episode. We will be discussing death and suicide. Today, we are working with Podcastathon to raise money for the Trevor Project. The link is in the description. Your support for the Trevor Project funds services like peer support, research, crisis services, advocacy, public education for LGBTQ plus youth. Even one supportive adult can change someone's life. If you are looking to create positive change, consider a donation today. Thank you. I want to welcome the most amazing poet, Rosemerry Wahtola Trommer. Now, Rosemary is so much more than a poet. Today, we'll be discussing her newest book, The Unfolding, which is so incredibly beautiful. I was just touched by so many of the poems and how words on a single page in simple language could convey so much of what it's like to be in some of the darkest times of your life and to be looking and searching for hope and love and working through to resilience. It's just so incredibly beautiful. Rosemary will share some tips for using this method in your own life when you're working through issues that you're having. So I want to read you Rosemary's bio that she sent me so you get an essence of who she is. Rosemary is a poet, a teacher, a speaker, and a writing facilitator who co-hosts the Emerging Form podcast on creative process. Her daily audio series, The Poetic Path, is on the Ritual app. Her poems have appeared on A Prairie Home Companion, PBS Hour, O Magazine, American Life Poetry, and Carnegie Hall Stage. Her most recent poetry collections are All the Honey, Samara Press in 2023, and The Unfolding, Wild House Publishing. In January 2024, she became the first poet laureate for Evermore, helping others explore grief, bereavement, wonder, and love through poetry. She has a one-word mantra: adjust. And one of the really interesting things about her newest book, The Unfolding, she marries words together to create new words for exactly how she's feeling, because she felt our language didn't quite have those words in our vocabulary to really touch on what it's like, the emotions you feel as you work through times that are challenging. So please join me, everyone, in a big warm welcome and a deep bow of gratitude for Rosemary showing up today to give us a little bit of her wisdom. Welcome, Rosemary. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Juliana, and congratulations on making such a beautiful podcast.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm gonna try really hard here not to fangirl because wow, your work is just so, it just resonates so deeply and profoundly in so many ways, not exclusively your poetry, which we're going to talk about today, but also your TED Talk. It just really made me think about how I think about the world and my metaphors and all the work that you've done, I think is just so deeply resonates. The ability to distill down this sense of grief and all the things that come with grief, all those emotions into, almost a few words on one page it almost like lightens the burden a little bit to distill it down into this just so meaningful moments of even things like rain or driving your car or walking down the street or it's all those things, the meadow, it just so distilled it all down into this place where you could hold it in your heart with some sense of reverence for yourself rather than that cycle you can get in grief that just so the emotion cycle of being angry, hating yourself, being upset, disappointed in yourself that you laughed one day, all this, the gamut of all those emotions. Yeah, and the hindsight, this the hindsight. Oh,
I think poems, I'd never thought of this, but I think you're right that one thing a poem can offer, both as a reader and as a writer, to a moment of grief is that it is just a moment. A poem is just a moment. And I think that it maybe the way to make it through grief, but really the way to make it through anything, we're just aware that we're needing to make it through when we're not doing so well,
Right.
is to meet it moment by moment by moment. And I think that's what poems do. They just show up for that, just that much.
Right.
Size, just a bite size, just this. And also to know that you can you don't write all of grief in one poem, right? That
Hmm.
it's not like one poem could touch it all. I mean, since my son died, my father died, I've written thousands of poems. Is that true? No, I've written over 1,000 poems.
Wow.
I've written over 1,000 poems. And yeah, I still, is there more to say? Of course there is, So I think it helps to know that you're not going to like write the one poem. You'll just like, oh, this is how I meet it today. This is
Mm.
how I meet it today. This is how it is today.
Oh, I love that because that's so theoretically you think it's all these things, but it really is just how you meet it today in this moment. And yeah, that the returning of it and how you meet that, the returning of it, even years, decades later, still the returning of it is to just meet it in that moment is yeah, I've never thought of that either because you tend to think of it as this thing you're carrying around with all the parts of it, which you are doing in some way, but you can't possibly be all of it at one time consistently. You're only that for fleeting moments, and then you're meeting it where you can. It's lovely. Well, while we're on the topic of death, I know for me, when I've experienced that, the death of a loved one profoundly affected how I saw things, how I smelled things, how I worked with my hands, how my brain worked. And I wondered how your poetry practice and your just practice in general might have changed after the death of your son and your father.
Mhm. First, I'll just say you're right, of course. That there's nothing after a tragic loss that isn't touched by it. Not
Mhm.
anything. Not the way you brush your teeth, not when you walk, the way you walk down the grocery store aisle. There is nothing too small to not be affected. So yes, that's totally true. In terms then of how my practice changed, it's interesting to me. So I had already had a daily poetry practice for when Finn died, it had already been over 15 years. So I had already this daily practice of showing up to wonder what's here now, what's happening inside me, what's happening in the world outside. And then the poem I like to think of as the bridge between these two worlds. Thank God I had that practice already in place, right? That habit of wanting to show up with curiosity to meet the world. I think because the stakes were so low before, I didn't know how low they were until they went up, right? But I had had a practice of showing up and meeting difficulty with curiosity and creativity already. And then, I mean, the first way that it changed is that I stopped writing. I stopped writing for the first time. I had stopped just for a brief period, a month or two after my daughter was born, and then came back to it. But other than that, I've been writing every day habitually for, since 2006. So to have that experience of not writing, but still noticing the the impulse of the poem when they would rise up,
Mm.
to be walking in the world and still be aware of how do I widen the lens to this moment? How do I open myself to this moment? And a longing to open the self to more,
Right.
even though it was painful.
Mm.
That's all I wanted, was to be open to it. I just wanted to feel it, feel it, feel it, feel it.
Wow.
And I think that bringing that kind of raw tenderness, I say tender, but what I really mean is wound, right? To bring that wound into the poems, of course
Mm.
that changed them. They, they were, bleeding on the page. Just, first thing, I felt like I was a skinned rabbit still alive. That
Mhm.
raw, that kind of wound,
Right.
that tender.
Right.
And Juliana, still the love that drives loss was so present for me always. I really never felt without it. I never felt abandoned by love. In fact, if anything, I felt at one point there was a very specific moment when this was the day after he died, and I remember walking down the street and I could feel energetically this kind of tsunami of love coming for me. I mean, in my mind, the story I tell myself is that like people, the word had spread and that people were hearing what had happened. And it was as if this just huge wave of love was coming, and I felt it coming, and I turned toward it and said no to it. I was like, it was too much, and it didn't care. It just I felt it, and then it was in me. Then it was so embodied, it was so physical, this sensation of being held from the inside. Like every single cell of me was being held by love. Like if pain were molecules, then every molecule of love was surrounded by, every molecule of pain was surrounded by love. I mean, it was that internal and external. I just had such a sensation of being carried
Wow.
that hasn't, I mean, although it's nowhere near as intense as it was. I mean, not even anything like it was, but it's still there. I still feel it.
Wow. That's incredible. That's incredible. I mean, love is so healing, but in these moments of grief, it's so hard to accept, to take it, and that you were able to do that was,
Friend, I don't think I had a choice, is what I'm telling you.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
I felt like I actually said no and it didn't care.
Wow. Wow.
And I think too, the night that my son died, my beloved friend Wendy Vitalock is a poet here on the Western Slope, and she and I were talking on the phone, and she said to me, "He has given you his love light to carry,"
Mm,
which I think turned me already in that most vulnerable moment to love,
mm,
which helped. I mean, those are the words I wish I could give every single person who's lost someone, that they have given you their love light to carry, and you can continually in everything you do honor them and celebrate them and bring forth their all the beauty, the best they had to offer, bring it forward with you.
wow. Yes, that's just so important, I think, in the whole process to really feel like you have this part of them that you can carry forward and honor them in a way that is so deep. It's beyond I honor you with this plaque or something of that nature. It's so intimately human and desperately needed. And so the essence of each one of us. It's lovely.
Yeah. I think about that actually. I have one of the poems in my new book is called Dactylography, which is the study of fingerprinting.
Mhm.
And I think about how each of us, the metaphor of the poem is that if somebody came to your heart, if they found all the fingerprints all over it,
Mm,
it wouldn't be all the people, right, who have shaped you and shaped your life with their love. It wouldn't be a crime scene. It would be a work of art. Just
right.
all those swirls and whirls and all those lines and all the ways we've been touched and made by love.
Mm,
And then to think of when our beloveds die, how do we continue to bring that love forward? And in this way, Juliana, I think, continue to develop a relationship with this person. How is it possible that a relationship, that love can grow even after someone has died? I don't think I knew that was possible until I did. Now
mhm,
I know it. Now I know it is.
mhm, mhm. It's so true. So true. And that's something that we're so focused on, like whether we're helping people or it's ourselves in, okay, how can we get you back to this functional space? How can we get you over this? How can we help you work through this? We just don't have the understanding or skill set because death is such a taboo subject still to talk about that we just don't have all those tools. But that is something that comes out of all of it is that you just start appreciating and loving that person so much more and differently. And you take the moment to reflect, you take the moment to accept the lessons, you take a moment to just really be in reverence with who that person was and still is still present everywhere.
Yeah, everywhere.
Which and it's not, but we think of it as this getting over. We have to get over this particular tragedy in our lives so we can be functional. But we forget that whole part of it's not necessarily getting over. It's learning to walk with in so many ways.
Yeah. I even think of how many people said something to me like, if I could take some of your pain, I would, which I knew they were saying with the best intentions. I remember the first time someone said it to me, I think I was like, in my mind, I don't believe I said this out loud, but I thought, don't you dare, don't you dare.
Right.
This is my, I'm feeling all this pain because of all this love. And if you took away this pain, would you, are you taking away this love? Don't you dare.
Right.
This is for me. This is what love looks like when we've lost someone.
Right.
It's not a problem.
Yeah,
It
exactly.
doesn't feel good, but it isn't a problem.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's so true. So true. So I know that so many of us, when we're going through these kinds of working with death and having it come upon us even when it's abrupt, when we can see it coming, however it appears, it's always it's never expected, really, at least in the Western world where it's taboo. So we don't really talk about it that much. We only understand it in a very different way from the reality of it. And when we've lost a loved one, we often do things like seek things that comfort us or that can be our companions working through the process. It might be a stuffed animal, a blanket, a pillow, a song, a moment, a smell, a place. It could even be, as we were talking about, how your poetry practice changed. But we search for these companions, not necessarily humans, although we do have these human companions that are walking through this process with us, but we search for these other grounding things. And I was wondering what poems companioned you while you were grieving? What became this anchor that you went to or relied upon or leaned on or cried on or what companioned you during that time?
It's a beautiful way to say it too, companioned you, and still does, by the way. In terms of other poems then that companioned me, because there were, lots of sweet little, like to this day I sleep with with his little skinny puppy
Oh,
lovey thing. Um, but in terms of poems, the first one that I'm aware of that really I'm so grateful is by Gregory Orr. And actually I made it a little song. If you don't mind, I'll sing it to you.
oh yeah, please do.
This is just the first half of the poem, but it's the half that spoke to me the most, and it's been carrying me ever since. Not to make loss beautiful, but to make loss the place where beauty starts, where the heart understands for the first time the nature of its journey. Not to make loss beautiful, but to make loss the place where beauty starts, where
Mm.
the heart understands for the first time. the nature of its journey. I think that was so important, Juliana, because it helped me not, I will never love the loss of my son. That's not beautiful.
Mhm.
And so much beauty has come from it. So to honor both of those at the same time, the heartache and the immeasurable beauty at opposite ends of the spectrum. So to meet them both is to, I feel like, to be living in full spectrum. And it's, I guess that's the only way I want to live.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. That poem is also, I believe, at the beginning of your book, The Unfolding, correct? Yeah, I actually wrote it down when I saw it in your book because I thought, wow, this is just such a gorgeous way of looking at it that you don't realize, wow, beginning of the journey,
Mhm.
the beauty, beginning of the beauty.
There's
Yeah.
another poem by not Rilke, forgive me, Rumi, who I love it and I argue with it. Uh, he says, here again, I'll sing it to you. I like to give them little tunes because then they're with you, they
Right.
just stay with us, right? The hurt you embrace becomes joy, joy. Call it to your arms where it can change. The hurt you embrace becomes joy. Call it to your arms where it can change. And I think, yes, yes, I do believe in turning toward the things that hurt us. I really believe let's turn toward the things that hurt us, that scare us, that make us angry with as much love and compassion as possible. Because I really think it does us zero good to pretend they're not happening.
Mhm.
Unless that's the only way you can survive. And for goodness sakes, just pretend it's not happening until you can turn toward it.
Right.
But the hurt you embrace becomes joy. I don't know that I totally believe the transformation of it. I think I'm a little more aligned in terms of sorry, Rumi. I mean, who am I to argue with a mystic? But um, but I wonder if I'm not a little more aligned with Gregory Orr's, it's painful and there's beauty, as opposed to let's take all the pain and turn it into beauty. Um, or maybe I just have to adjust my definition of joy.
Mm. Yes, very good point. I always wondered about the use of joy in that um, quote by Rumi, like, oh, it's interesting you chose joy as let's create it into joy, not love or compassion or any of these other things that, what does joy encompass for Rumi?
But maybe I would if I could rewrite it. This is a little inspired by something you said earlier at the very beginning of our conversation. You said something about I think you said something. I think the word you used was maybe even beauty of touching what's difficult. There is a freedom in touching what is difficult.
Mm,
There is a relief that comes from when we touch what's difficult. So the hurt you embrace becomes freedom. That I think I could get if you can turn toward it and say yes to the world as it is, as painful as it is.
mhm.
Oh gosh, I think it takes so much energy to pretend that the world isn't the way it is or to wish it were different than it is. That takes so much energy. So the
Right.
moment we can say, oh, yes, I don't like it. I don't like this. And this is what happened. And we turn toward it with openness. There is so much release and freedom in that, which I think that is for me, Juliana, maybe the greatest blessing of writing poems in meeting difficult moments, whether it's grief or fear and anger. It could be any number of things, right? But when we turn toward that most difficult thing and say, okay, here I am. What do you have to teach me?
Yeah.
With that kind of humility and wonder, God, I feel it in my body right now, how soft I can be in that moment.
Yeah, it's so true. I think that's such a beautiful lesson for people now who are really not just around grief and loss, but all the uncertainty that so many people are feeling around the world with current affairs, with politics, with things very unexpected, like being laid off or finding all these other worries that are coming across their plate that get so it's just human nature to spend a lot of time dwelling on the negative, right? But to imagine yourself being in that moment of Zen where you can turn towards it and not like it, but also seek to understand it or seek the lessons or be quiet with it, even if you can't do any of that, to just acknowledge that this is present. I turn towards it, but in this moment, I'm okay, even if that's all you can do.
Boy, I've been thinking about this week. I feel like I've had this kind of epiphany about this, about how turning toward fear, you got laid off your job. How are you going to pay your bills? How are you going to support your family? How are you going to support yourself? Like is so different than turning toward grief, in which like I said, I never felt the absence of love in grief, which makes sense to me because grief really evolves out of love. So it has love at its roots. Fear does not. And so that turning toward fear is a whole different experience because it isn't, I think, essentially imbued with love already.
Mhm.
So to turn toward fear doesn't have that power. So then I think, okay, so if I'm going to turn toward fear, and I happen to know already just how powerfully love can, well, transform,
Mhm.
transform. Thank you, Rumi. How do I bring love to this moment of fear then?
Right,
And allow that to be part of the turning toward. Whether not that we love the thing that we're afraid of. I'm not saying
right,
that.
right.
Definitely not. But how do we invite love into this moment? And if we can't find love in this moment, how do we plant it? And if we can't fathom planting it because we're just that freaking exhausted,
Right.
then where else do we feel held by love that we can could I feel, oh, someone loves me, even if it's just love itself, not a real someone, even
Hmm.
if it's just my own compassion for myself? Can
Right,
I bring my own compassion for myself to this frightening moment?
right.
That I can always do. That I can always do. Sometimes I have to psych myself up for it. Think about it. Notice, oh, you forgot the self-compassion part. But
Right.
that it is, I am capable of that. Oh, sweetheart, look at you. You are so scared. Of course you are. That brings love to a moment
Right.
and changes.
It's so true. And we forget to do that for ourselves. We forget to go give ourselves some tenderness, give ourselves that hug, however that is, of don't worry, I've got you. I think it's just another thing so many things we learn on our own as we journey through this life that we weren't equipped with when we started.
And that's how it is.
Hmm.
That's just how it is.
Right.
I mean, I think about thank God this is why I love getting older, actually, Juliana. I actually love getting older. I love that the things that used to just drive me crazy don't have the same effect they used to, or the things that used to scare me don't have the same effect, or the things that used to be difficult now are so simple, not always, of course, not always. And we're talking about degrees, but in general, oh my gosh, I love the vast lifetime of experience that got me to this moment. I'm just so grateful for every single freaking minute of it, even the
Right.
hard parts.
Yes. Yes. I am with you there. It's so true. And again, we're so conditioned to think, oh, it's a bad thing. But then when you really look at it, wow, wow. It
Mm.
it's hard to find words to explain or communicate your understanding of the world through all the things that have happened and your interpretation of what is and why you're here and what's important and what's not so important and what you can let go of is there's just no real word or even single, well, maybe you could come up with a single sentence being a poet, but there's just no concise little thing you can say to really explain what that is, because in some shape you want there to be, I want the sorrow to be seen. I want the lessons to be seen. I want the joy to be seen. I want moments of learning to be seen. I want moments of bliss to be seen. I want, my nothingness to be seen. I want my everything to be seen. And how do you condense that down into a word? And that was one of the things I found really interesting in your last book, and how the first couple chapters you actually created your own words for what you were feeling. And I just loved that so much. It was so, you had one that connected sorrow with Om, and oh God, incredibly beautiful. If you could talk a little bit about how you came up with that, what how you came up with the words, what was that whole process, and when did you think, yes, I'm going to make up my own words, because there are just none that are doing it for me.
Yeah. I mean, it is just fun to make up words, so there's that. And I originally had a different structure for the book that the publisher didn't like. And but he said to me, Mark S. Burroughs, who is just such a lovely, lovely human, said, Rosemary, calls me up. I've been thinking, all your poems are praise poems. Maybe something about that. And it was a thrill to me, Juliana, that he had seen that he knew something about my poems that I didn't, which was thrilling to me.
Mhm.
And I was like, that's right. They are. They are all poems that are falling in love with the world, even in a difficult time. And so I thought, okay, what if I organize the book in terms of praise? I looked at the words we have for praise right now. Laud, extol. I was like, oh my gosh, these are terrible. And even the word praise itself just has this kind of over sparkly,
Mhm.
um,
Ingenuine kind of.
ridiculously radiant.
Yeah.
It just seemed too bright for certainly for this book, which at the heart of this book is reaching toward both sides of the emotional spectrum, right? Reaching toward great sorrow and reaching toward great joy. So I was like, okay, I'll make up my own words. Inspired in part by the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows. I don't know if you know
Oh,
Jacob.
yes.
God, I love that book. In a way, I did it similarly to him, in which I take two words and blend them.
Mhm.
Like, the kids talk about ship words, like if you're.
Right.
So basically, I made ship words for joy and sorrow, or
Mhm.
joy and so sarom in itself. The definition I gave it is a paradoxical praise for beauty, love, strength, and connection that can only emerge as we wrestle with devastation, grief, and the worries and pains of daily living. A positive side effect of surrender and trust in life and death. And to me, just with that acceptance of right? Just the affirmation of just so we get just this sorrow, just oh yeah, that hurts, and here it is.
Right.
And how do we fall in love with the world in these vulnerable, heartbroken, tender moments? How do we do that?
Right.
Because we do, because I know we do. It's
Yeah.
possible. It's not only possible, I think it's essential for our humanity.
Yeah. So true.
Can I read you one of the poems out of this?
Yes, please do. That was going to be my next question.
How about this one? It surprised me, Juliana, how after Finn died, there were so many similarities to when he was a baby. So he died
Mhm.
when he was just before his 17th birthday. And, when I was allowed to see his body, it was wrapped in white, basically swaddled, right? And
Mhm.
when they returned his ashes, the box was about the size of a baby.
Mhm.
And I remember, kind of carrying it around the house on my hip and like it was a baby and just
Mm.
talking him through it, Oh, look, here's where you
Oh.
played piano. Here's where you hit your head on the counter. Here's where we snuggled on the couch. And I think the other thing that was so shocking about it was just how when you have a baby, and like you said earlier, everything changes. Like everything changes. The smallest part of what you think you know about the world has changed, and everything's affected. Of course, your sleep and your eating and your time, and but just if you
Right.
shower, like you just don't know how everything's upside down. And it's exactly the same after a traumatic death where you don't suddenly know how to live your life anymore.
Mm.
So this poem is called Condition, and it's actually a thank you letter to the body.
Mm.
Condition. My body, thank you for carrying this ache, for carrying it not like a burden, but like a baby, like a gift, like something that will change you and keep changing you forever. Of course, you would want to shut down, to close, to contract, but I see how the grief grows you. Though it shreds your sleep, though it drops you to the floor, you learn what it is to be human. Through no effort of your own, you are on board for a miracle so big, this invitation to love. Oh, body, you would never ask for this. And yet, you meet this grief every moment. You find inner doors you never knew were there, and you swing them open, not to rid yourself of the ache, but to grant it full access, to know the grief completely, to let it rewrite you, remake you, rebirth you, to let it teach you what it means to be alive.
Mm. Oh, so beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, we learned so much. Who would want it? Nobody could ever ask for this, right? We could never ask for it. And not to make loss beautiful, but to make loss the place where beauty starts, right? Where the heart understands for the first time the nature of its journey.
Right. Yes. Yes. I love how you brought the body into it because so much of grieving seems to happen here, maybe, and then kind of trickles down to these other places that you hold the other emotions. But even though you can't get out of bed, you crawl to the bathroom, it's so I never thought of how connected those experiences of birth and death are with the in the body. This is exactly the same. You don't care what you look like when you go out. You're just so happy to have been able to get yourself together enough to walk out the door, even though you want to just turn around and go back in, and just having to face all those things. Wow, that's so incredible. It's just being able to just sit with that and write it down and put it out there for people, or even if you're not putting it out there, to put it down on the page as something just gives it a little bit more of trueness, of realness, of importance.
I like that you say it that way too. I feel like when my I always call the poems the byproduct of the real practice, which is the sitting down and wondering what's here. And the invitation I give myself each time I sit down is, can you write something true? That's all I try to do is to write something true. And then just write the next true thing and the next true thing and let the whole poem come from writing the next true thing, which isn't always, a fact, right? Like you pointed out earlier before we were recording, there's a book in here about me, my alter ego word woman, being a character, a new superhero in the MCU in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And no, that didn't really happen.
Right.
So when I say it has to be true, I don't mean factual, but I just mean there's real juice, there's real curiosity, there's a real, I'm not writing it to sound good. I really don't write for anyone but me.
Right.
I really write, and I encourage everyone, by the way, to write very selfishly. Then it honestly won't matter if anyone else likes it or not, because it will have done the work it needs to do for you. And
Mm.
if we can write in this way, with that kind of curiosity, with that kind of, I'm even gonna say urgency, right? What's true? What's true right now? Even if we don't even write a word, but we sit and we wonder, what's true
Mm,
right now? That's the practice. That's it. That's it. What's true? What's true? Knowing that sometimes the opposite is equally true.
mhm. Wow. That is great advice for people who are wanting to kind of work with their grief with pen and paper or a doc or however it is that they're doing it. Do you have any other advice for people who are writing to meet their grief
Uh,
or
I'm
maybe
hesitant to
sense
call
it?
it advice, but I have some ideas. Um, I will say one thing that helped me enormously was that I would, especially in the beginning, but still to this day, this is still a big part of my practice too. I would just wonder, um, today grief is, and then fill in the blank.
Mm,
Today grief is, and you can fill that blank in, and even if that's the only sentence you write, you just fill it in. Today grief is lonely. Today grief is exhausted. Today grief, so that you could fill it in with an adjective. But you could also fill it in a surprising way with anything that you see around you, right? Today grief is a window. Today grief is a cottonwood tree. Today grief is a river. Without knowing why you wrote that, right? That you can just write it and trust that something will come up. Then if you write, okay, today grief is an eraser. Why? Then I make a little list of eraser properties. I make a little list of eraser uses. And then I wonder, eraser, what do you have to teach me? And in this way, it us up, it opens me up to this, what I wouldn't have known I knew, right? We're drawing on our intuition. We're allowing creativity to companion us here.
mhm.
And so both this book, The Unfolding, and my previous book, All the Honey, are full of poems that began with Today Grief Is. There's the poem about the eagle and the eraser and the earthworm and the hawk and the cottonwood shadow and the teaspoon,
Right.
all these things that made their way
And
into.
the hymn was also, would you say that did you start with that same practice of today grief is the hymn, or did you feel
Oh, him began kind of as a maybe I'll read it and then
what?
I'll tell you just a little bit about the practice of writing it. So the poem hymn, the title is spelled Hymn, hymn, like a song of praise. And then, but you'll hear how it comes in often with its homophone, Him.
Right, right.
And I'll just say on the page, the poem has its left line is how would you describe that? It's a
It's
curve.
kind of like a, yeah.
Him, the shocking tender curl of him, wild river, raging rush of him, the eddied lazy swirl of Sunday morning sleepy smile of him, the flood stage leaping wave of him, high overflowing shores of him, torrential reckless course of him, now empty unfilled banks of, dry barren rocky bed of, the utter lack of here of, the pray for rain parched air of him, dark growing rain cloud storm of him. Sometimes I hear rapids hum, deep currents in my lungs of him. How is it? I still breathe him in. The river is inside me, him. The poem was inspired by a river, which happens to be just right out my back door. I'm looking at it right now. And thinking about him as a river and all the different stages of river, the wild river, the raging rush, the eddied lazy swirl, the morning, the flood stage, the overflowing shore, just all of these ways that, and then when it gets, there's not enough of it and there's just the trickle and you're praying for rain. And so it was kind of all portraits of him as river. It's really just the list poem, all these different ways that he had shown up in his life. But then you can also hear that there's this kind of metric imperative that's pushing the poem forward. Uh,
Mhm.
which is a lot of fun to play with. I love writing from sound and just letting myself be led by sound, which is another great way to surprise yourself. And also, I was interested in what happens if I put the word him at the end of every line. But then, because he's missing, there's also that part in the heart of the poem where the word is missing, just like he is, except
Mhm.
that he's also so present in every other way. You know,
Right, right.
he's absent at the heart and he's also present throughout it. So it was, this is, I guess, maybe one of the things too, Juliana, is that there's when we can bring creativity to pain, there is a chance for pleasure.
Mhm.
That sounds so strange to say, and yet it's true. I loved writing that poem. It sucks writing that poem. Are you kidding? It's right. I'm writing about my dead son. That sucks.
Right.
And I loved writing this poem and exploring all the ways that he was a river,
Mm.
all the ways that he rose up and swirled around. And the river was such an enormous part of his and my life, just playing beside it and in it and looking at it and taking pictures of it and throwing rocks in it and all the things we did with the river.
So beautiful. So beautiful. I can so see you looking out the window and naturally just coming to this comparison. And yeah, how hard. Beautiful. So that's kind of another thing people can really use to talk about their emotions in general, especially if they're uncomfortable. It's a very uncomfortable space to be in with grief and loss.
Mhm.
So many reasons, but as you said, to go, it's an eraser. Why? Why?
What do you have to teach me?
Yeah.
And I think when we bring that curiosity in, it's not that it doesn't fix anything, right? A poem will never fix anything. It doesn't take the pain away. But what it can do is invite more than pain in, right? So there's pain and love. There's pain and love and curiosity. There's pain and love and curiosity and pleasure. So that the pain is not the whole story.
Right. Right.
It's a big part of the story. I'm not saying that. It may be the most of the story, but suddenly it isn't all there is.
Right. 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 Yeah, there's a practice where you sit with your emotions and you think, oh, this is pain. This is grief. Oh, now it's sadness. Oh, now it's despair. Oh, now it's a, a memory of a happy moment. Oh, now it's shame that you had the happy moment. Whatever it is that your emotions are only really last a couple of seconds before you're on to the next one. And it's kind of this, getting to the root of what is the root of the emotion, if possible. And then how do you be okay with whatever that root is? How do you say, oh, this is the root?
I wonder if there is a root. I don't know.
Hmm. I agree with you there.
I mean, I'm just thinking about here's the TED Talk, right? There
Right.
is the metaphor. You introduced the root metaphor. Is it true there's a root to it, or is it that it just continually changes and changes and changes and maybe I'm not saying it's not true. It might be true. And it might be true, and another model might be equally true, right?
Right.
In which there isn't a root, and in fact, it's a field, and they
Hmm.
all exist at once, right?
Right. Right.
And here we are in this field of it all. I'm just looking out my window because there's a field. So, and this is how it works, right? I mean, this is how a metaphor can change.
Right.
Not this, it doesn't change what happened ever, but it changes how we meet what happened. And that
Exactly.
changes everything.
You so clearly demonstrated that just by going a field. It's no longer a route, it's a field. And how that change in the metaphor really changes so much. That TED Talk was so powerful. I will definitely link it in the description along with everything Rosemary in the description for those of you who want to seek more. But yeah, it changed my whole perspective of, I like to think in metaphors all the time, and it's a visual kind of thing. And it really made me question, what could it be something else? Well, it was just so playful, but also so profound.
There it is.
So,
It is. It's playful. It's playful. Yeah. And I
yeah,
just want to encourage anyone who's like, oh, yeah, well, she's a poet. Of course, you can think of metaphors. Everybody thinks in terms of metaphors. That is all language is made of metaphors. So if you speak a language, you are fluent in metaphors. So you trust yourself.
right.
Go play with them. I'll share one, Juliana, that's been one of the more important ones for me, especially meeting grief. I think this story I'm about to tell you happened before Finn died, but things were very difficult. He was very unhappy and struggling, and I was doing everything I could to accommodate everything that was happening. And I remember thinking, okay, I'm going to hold it all. I'm going to hold it all. And I kept thinking of myself like a vase that was holding it all, and all these things that I was feeling, the joy and the sorrow and the fear and the anger and all of it, right? These were like stems in the vase. And the vase, I just kept thinking, okay, I'm going to keep expanding my vase so I can keep holding it all, which honestly was really exhausting
Hmm.
and started to feel utterly untenable. And my spiritual teacher, Joy Sharp, said to me, are you sure you need to hold it? Oh my goodness. That one question was so beautiful because I saw in that moment, right through that vase metaphor, oh, I think I need to hold it. But what if I don't? What if I just stopped holding at all? We all know that all these feelings are going to come anyway, right?
Right.
They're all going to come. We don't have to. So if all these feelings come and I don't hold them and I just let them move through, what if I'm not a vase? What if I'm a sieve? What if I don't hold it? What if I just meet it? That's all I have to do. That takes zero effort from me. That's totally possible. And I'm so grateful that I had that kind of epiphany before Finn died so that I could have this image of things moving through as opposed to feeling like I have to hold this. I have to hold all of this. Why do I have to hold all this weight? I can't hold all this weight. You don't have
Right.
to.
Right. Right. Yes, so true. How did you, oftentimes people talk to me about, well, this practice, yeah, sounds logical, but how do you actually shift from that? What did you do to shift from your feeling like you holding everything to watching it pass through? Like, did you have to just mentally recognize it when you were doing that and shift, or what did you do to shift?
That's a good question. Part of it, I think, is just hearing the word, right? Just hearing the word and people say it enough. No, I bet you too will start hearing people say it, even yourself. I can hold it. Can you hold it all? I'm holding it all. You will hear it and you'll think, is that true? Do I have to hold it all? It's
Mm.
just that little, just it's the question, right?
Mhm.
Do I have to, or is it true I need to hold it? So the first part is awareness, just to hear the words. Oh, I think I need to hold it all. That makes it really simple then to because the brain works in metaphors. This is how the brain works.
Mhm.
That's all neuroscience, right? So the moment that we take that frame that says, holding, vase, container, vessel, that's the image. The moment we replace that with, oh, sieve. Now the channel, right? The brain channel goes this way.
Mhm.
And it's so available to every single one of us all the time. Like I said, it doesn't change the world, but it changes how we meet the world. And it just is that little noticing. Oh, oh, sweetheart, you thought you had to hold it. What if you don't hold it? Doesn't mean I don't get caught, sweet Juliana. I still carry shit until I
Right,
remember I don't have to.
right, right,
But
right.
then it's just that it's that remembering. Oh, yeah. And it's the hearing, it's just tuning the ear.
Yeah, yeah. That
Because
is
we tell the same stories over and over. That's what we do, right? They
Mhm.
become habitual.
Right. That is so, so, so true. And I think of perhaps people could incorporate that a little bit into their, a lot of times I have felt personally when I've experienced loss and grief that it always comes with this bit of guilt that can just worry itself into a bit into shame, and we can find ourselves dwelling there all the time with this regret or despair or now we can't fix the problem anymore because that person isn't here. And so how do we do that? And we end up staying in that place, sort of weaving that tapestry bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and expanding it to other parts of our lives where it's not really necessarily the truth, or although truth is all subjective, you can easily find yourself there. But to be able to use a practice where you ask yourself questions, like you were saying, like, do I have to hold this all? Do I have to carry this responsibility of, what I did when I was 5 years old that I never said sorry for? Can I find a way to be a sieve there and be compassionate towards myself rather than using that to then develop shame and negative self-talk and all these other things that we could easily go to?
Yeah, I'd love to share a poem with you
Oh, yeah.
about this exact practice of seeing the story and making a choice to change it.
Mm.
This is in my book, All the Honey, and it's called The Invitation. 2 nights after he died, all night, I heard the same one-line story on repeat. I am the woman whose son took his life. The words felt full of self-pity, filled me with hopelessness, doom. And then a voice came, a woman's voice just before dawn, and it gave me a new shade of truth. I am the woman who learns how to love him now that he's gone.
Mm.
It did not change the facts, but it changed everything about how I met the facts. Over 100 days later, over 3 years later, I am still learning what it means to love him. How love is an ocean, a wildfire, a crumb, how commitment to love changes me, changes everyone, invites us to bring our best. Love is wine, is trampoline, is an infinite song with a chorus in which I am sung. I am the woman who learns how to love him now that he's gone. May I always be learning how to love, like a cave, like a rough-legged hawk, like a sun.
Mm.
The moment that I could hear that story and see how devastating that story was, how wounding that story was. And honestly, I guess how selfish that story was. And then to have this other story arrive, like it really did arrive. It was really Grace that delivered that new story. I am the woman who learns how to love him now that he's gone. I don't feel like I manufactured that story, although I'm so grateful that it came. And I think it is possible to create our own stories. That's what we've been talking about.
Right.
That wasn't the case with this one, but that doesn't mean that we still can't do it. To have a new story arrive and tell and to let it be a story that's infused with love. He has given me his love light to carry. Right? I am the woman who learns how to love him now that he's gone. That is a story that I want to live into.
Mm. That is very powerful. A story that you want to live into. Yes. Yes. It's so many levels and so many ways, so many times during our lives. That should be a foundational question. What is the story we want to live into? Yeah, wow. That's amazing. Amazing. Thank you for that. See, I promised you lots of wisdom, and here we are. Lots of wisdom. I I guess we couldn't really talk about our stories or poetry or writing without really talking about the vulnerability that presents when you start to write your story, is showing up authentically as your story and changing your story and imagining your story and working with that and working with metaphor, your emotions. Like, your emotions are very much part of this, and vulnerability is such a, I mean, that's where these emotions come out and show themselves. How do you work with the vulnerability, considering you put so much of yourself out there on the page or on your blog or in all the places that you show up here today, how do you find that space of vulnerability and maintain that and work with that?
Oh, what a beautiful question. I think you're totally right, Juliana, that that everything that I've talked about so far is predicated on a willingness to be vulnerable.
Right.
I think maybe it's more of that than I hadn't ever thought of it this way, but I think that it is a willingness to be vulnerable. But I think vulnerability itself takes zero effort. It takes a lot of effort to not be vulnerable. It takes a lot of effort to protect ourselves. That takes a lot of effort. To be
Right.
vulnerable takes zero effort. That doesn't mean it's always safe, which is why we've learned how to protect ourselves, which is why we decide we're not going to be vulnerable.
Right.
My experience is this, that it is painful for me not to be vulnerable most of the time.
Mhm.
That actually hurts more. That doesn't mean you can't be vulnerable and silly, right? You can be
Right.
vulnerable, but to wall ourselves off from the world, from our feelings, from the feelings of others, I feel like it's like cutting, putting a tourniquet on the arm, right? No, I don't want to feel you, so I'm going to cut you off.
Right.
Oh, what happened? Your arm falls off. That's what happens. You
Right.
know,
Right.
and it hurts. It starts to hurt more and more and more and more. And I think that that's true with vulnerability also. I think that and I think vulnerability is like anything else, that if you are not used to being vulnerable, then we start really small. Can I do it? It's just like lifting weights, right? Start really small and try trusting one vulnerable moment with yourself. Maybe, you know,
Right.
I can tell you this, that every now and then I freak out slightly when I realize that I'm sending every day I send my poems out. My first drafts, I send out my first drafts every day to like 10,000 people. And I'm like, every now and then I freak out. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, you just said what to all these people?
Right.
Somebody will say something to me, I'll be like, how would you know that? And then I'm like, oh, I wrote it in a poem. Um, yeah, I freak out a little, but of course, like I said, it started small too, right? I started sending them out to two people. It was only two people I sent it to for years, actually, before
Right.
I sent it to like four and then 10 and then 100. And yeah, so I think I couldn't have started with 10,000.
Yeah.
That would have been really freaky. Still freaks me out.
Yeah, I was gonna say, even now, yeah, that's really living, being vulnerable. And also is a good, it's also kind of a nice mirror for the 10,000 people you're sending that to, you also can find that space, however small or large.
Juliana, people write me all the time, every day, letting me know that it matters.
Mhm.
And I think that's part of it too, right? I think I've gotten enough positive affirmation that it matters to live vulnerably and share that,
Right.
that that also surely makes it easier, because people let me know it means so much to them, that they too change because who they
Mhm.
are and how they are in the world because of reading the poems. So I think that cycle of this matters feeds my willingness to be vulnerable.
Mhm. It's so true. I feel like in one of my podcasts quite a while ago, I said vulnerability is a superpower because it can come very natural once you allow it to be present, but it just is so quietly powerful in so many ways. Like you're saying, people responding with it changed their lives, your vulnerability or, your ability to be in touch with how you feel and what you feel. Also, your own vulnerability really enriches your own life, right? Now, I don't have to, I used to be a person that showed up with, I have to have these certain personas and be this certain thing to be heard and to be noticed and to be valued. And it was so much work, but just letting it go. Sometimes I think I might swing a little bit onto the other side if I'm doing a talk and I'm supposed to be, the expert. And here I am like, well, but I also think that resonates with people. Maybe we're at a place in life where we don't need so much the experts to tell us, but the people who have been there are know a little bit more about it to be in community with us and whatever that is. And yeah, it's just so effortless, really.
Another blessing about getting old, right?
Yes, so true. So true.
Just that trust that we learn, the self-trust, the confidence.
Right.
But I say confidence, but I mean vulnerability, right? I mean the unwalling, the unmasking, the knowing we don't have to be so smart or so polished or so good. We just if we can show up real, if we can show up real, isn't that what we want all the
Right.
time? More than anything.
Hmm.
Nothing. There's no perfume that smells better than truth. None.
So true. So, so true. And another metaphor, which now I will never think of perfume the same. There's so many other things that are also perfume in life, you
Yeah.
know.
Oh yeah. Some of them are pretty stinky.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So, in our last bit of this conversation, I want to make sure you have some time to really tell us a little bit about the title unfolding and what it means to you and what putting together this work meant for you and maybe even how you went into it and then how you when you knew when it was time to, okay, this work is complete. What was that like? What was this metamorphosis or this process like from start to finish? What did it mean to you? Tell us how you picked the title, what you put in there, and it was so well thought out about just the flow and everything about it. So tell us all.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Juliana, for this question. Especially, I have a podcast myself called Emerging Form, which is
Right.
all about creative process, which is like this is the essence of it, right? This is my jam. I love
Right.
this part, that not the what, but the how.
Yeah.
So the book itself, I didn't know. I mean, it began formless. I just write poems every day, so it's not like I have to write them for a book. I'm always kind of jealous of people who do that, who know this is what they're writing about, and then they write all the poems toward that. I have more of the process of I have these 1,000 poems, which ones are going to go into this book, and what makes sense to me about it. Originally, I began with this idea of the 11 Powers of the Universe by Brian Swimme. If you aren't familiar with it, just Google Brian Swimme, Swimme, the 11 Powers, and it's thrilling about how our universe was made, beginning, and there it begins with zero, which I also love, seamlessness, and then it goes through homeostasis and centration. And I'm not saying I'm in the right order. There's cataclysm and transformation and transmutation and radiance, interrelatedness. So I thought, what if I put them into these 11 categories, these poems? Would they fit? They did. It was great. I loved it. And I loved the arc of it. It wasn't a linear arc, it was an energetic arc that tells a very different kind of story of how things are born and fall apart and regenerate. And well, the editor didn't like it so much. He's like, Rosemary, 11 chapters is really way too many, and nobody wants to read a chapter called homeostasis. I do, but so I was like, okay, which is at which point he was the one who said, what about praise? And then I created these 4 words of praise. But the secret, Juliana, is I got my cake and ate it too. I still have those 11 chapters are hiding inside this book in order. So it still has that same arc with those 4 words on top. The title and the unfolding came from I always feel a little weird saying this, like I need to give a disclaimer. But I had a vision, and it And my daughter's like, why don't you just call it a dream? I'm like, because it wasn't a dream.
Mhm.
It was a white ranunculus. So if you're familiar with those, they look a little bit like peonies, and they have many, many, many layers. And
Mhm.
in this vision, there was this like an enormous white ranunculus, and it just kept opening and opening and opening and opening. All these petals, just imagine this grand opening
Mhm.
and opening and opening and opening and opening. Stem, I was like, oh my God, the stem's not going to be able to sustain this. And in fact, it broke. And then I realized, oh, that it was being held still by the universe. There
Mhm.
was this trust of that we couldn't possibly open too far. That,
Mhm.
that if we open beyond our ability to support ourselves, we will be supported. And so that image of the unfolding of this just ever evolving blossoming, I think really speaks to what it is to be a human. Like we've been saying, thank God for every experience we've had that brought us here, all of that unfolding.
Mhm.
Grief itself, how it opens and opens and opens us in horrible and beautiful ways continually. It's not like that story ends. I don't know that I believe in healing. I don't think we get over it. No, I think we continue to open and open and open and open our understanding, our relationship with our beloved. Or even, I say beloved, honoring that sometimes we have these relationships with people who've died that are very complicated and
Right.
maybe not feel like they're our beloved, but we continue to grow that relationship too.
Mhm.
How does it continually unfold? So that was the story of the title.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Yes, I love the whole fact that it came out of a vision. It's so, I, I agree with you. It's all, every time I say, well, I had a vision, blah, 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 someone will go, what? But I think all of us have visions, things that come to us sporadically. It's the weight or the noticing or it's what we give to it that makes it, how you can dream and have these very vivid dreams, but then, by the time you've made coffee, you forgot what they are, or they stick with you for days and years.
Mhm. Yeah. I have noticed I, after Finn died, I had many, and now not so much.
Mm.
And I thought, was it the grief? Was it the being so open? Was it being that skinless bunny? Is that what it was that allowed for that to happen? Honestly, I think it was more that I did nothing,
Mm.
that I wasn't busy, that I wasn't doing. I think I was open to them because I was open.
Right,
I didn't
right.
have my own agenda for moving through a day for a
Right.
time. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
So if I'd like to have more more of that kind of spoon fed by the universe, maybe I should just slow the heck down.
Yeah, there you go. Hours of doing nothing. We're so committed not to ever do, not necessarily hours, but to take that time without the busy brain or doing something, or it's so hard to take that time, but I think so important in so many ways. Yeah. Well, this has been the most amazing conversation. I thank you so, so much for being here and sharing all of your wisdom with us. Is there any final advice or thoughts you could give us? One thing we didn't really get to was how play or lightheartedness or even laughter can make its way into this, poems of grief or just the grief process in general, like inviting it all and how to work with that in a poem where you feel like it's giving reverence to what I want to say and not making light of it or anything like that. And
Oh, well, God, I think if you can make light of it, for God's sakes, do. I just, I guess if I have anything at all, it's just if you are going through grief and you're surviving, then you're doing it. Then this is it.
Mm,
Just think there's infinite ways to do it right.
right.
Each of us is going to meet it our own way, and it's going to be different for each person, and it's going to be different within one person from moment to moment to moment. Um, yeah, just if you're doing it, then my God, I honor you. You're doing it.
Yeah, beautiful, wonderful. Yes. Yes, to all of
If anyone is interested in doing their own writing, I do lead through Evermore, which is a fabulous grief organization. Evermore.org is where you would find them. And I lead writing workshops for people meeting grief. I think they're called meeting grief, writing. I don't. You'll find it.
I'll
You can
find
find
it and
on
I
the
will.
Evermore webpage, or you can find it on my at rosemerry.com. Rosemerry, rosemary.com. You can find it on my calendar also, but those are very inexpensive. And if you are unable, if that's too much, then no one will be turned away. We want everyone to be there. So they are every other month for the rest of the year, starting in March.
Oh, terrific. Okay. And I will make sure I link that as well in the description for anyone who's interested. And I also want to encourage folks to share this podcast with someone you think might find it valuable or might need to hear this, or are just looking for community in some way around the topics we discussed today. Please, please, please share it with folks who need it. And thank you again so much, Rosemary. This has been just incredibly wonderful. I'm just so grateful you chose to come and share this with us. It's been amazing. It's wonderful. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Juliana. Thank you so much.